Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. We welcome you to today's webinar, The Road to Market Authorization for Sterile Medical Devices within the European Union, sponsored by Sterigenics. Sterigenics is the leading global provider of outsourced terminal sterilization services for the medical device, pharmaceutical, food safety, and advanced application market. With their industry-recognized expertise, they help ensure the safety of millions of patients around the world every year. Across their 48 global facilities, they offer customers a complete range of sterilization services, primarily using three major technologies: gamma irradiation, ethylene oxide processing, and electron beam irradiation. My name is Stephanie Wadilla, and I am a Sotera Health Analyst, and I will be your monitor for today's call. Before we get started, I have a few quick announcements. First of all, this webinar will be recorded and will be available in the Sotera Health Academy for review in the next 72 hours. This webinar is designed to be interactive and the slides will advance automatically. You may ask a question at any time by clicking on the Q&A icon up at the top of your screen and entering your question. We encourage your questions and we'll try to answer as many as we can in the last few minutes of the webinar. Today's speaker is Syed Khorshahi, the Executive Vice President of Medical Devices and Chief Technology Officer for Regulatory Compliance Associates. Syed has more than 25 years of experience leading R&D teams in all aspects of developing safety-critical medical devices and has significant domain expertise in US, FDA, and EU standards, as well as in software systems and hardware development for the medical device industry. We are also joined today by Marie Hildebrand, the RA and QA Director for EMEA Sterigenics. Marie started her career with Sterigenics 7 years ago as a responsible site quality assurance manager for an EO facility, as well as a qualified person for EU regulations for pharmaceutical products. Marie has since resumed the role of RA/QA Director for EMEA, ensuring QA oversight for 11 of the EMEA facilities for both radiation and gas technologies. Marie's expertise includes deep knowledge in both EU regulatory requirements as well as global sterilization requirements. Now, to begin today's presentation, I turn the time over to Syed.
All right, thank you, Stephanie. All right, today's learning objectives are the process to get the CE mark under EU MDR. Also, what does it take to get safety and compliance with the EU medical device regulations? And also, when Marie comes on later, she'll talk about gaining a better understanding of the interactions with a sterilization subcontractor to gain CE mark for sterile products. Let's talk a little bit about what drove EU to move from MDD to MDR. One of the items was outdated regulations, such as there was no, for example, combination product regulations, or the software has got a lot more sophisticated, and there are a bunch of reasons that the outdated regulations was one of the reasons to drive us to MDR. Lack of consistency with the directive and the variation in how they were implemented across EU countries, as opposed to now that it's a regulation and it's consistent across all the member states. Under MDD, the focus was on an approval as a one-time deal, as opposed to now we're looking at this as a life cycle throughout the lifespan of the product, in terms of post-market, to monitor and control the performance and safety of the products. We used to have a narrow focus on accountability, and we'll talk a little bit about this when we talk about the stakeholders, but there was no accountability in the supply chain besides the manufacturer. So no liability for other economic operators such as importers, distributors, and relabelers. There was also insufficient scrutiny on the notified bodies. Basically, notified bodies were behaving more like the industry partners for the manufacturers to approve the product with no mandatory monitoring of safety and quality throughout the product lifecycle. So to address these shortcomings in EU MDR, that's when in 2017, EU MDR came into force, and 3 years later, it was supposed to come in to effect in 2020, but due to COVID, it was postponed to last year. So we are 10 months post-application date of EU MDR now. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the roles and responsibilities, because that ties in to what drove EU to move from MDD to MDR. Here's a list of the different stakeholders: the Commission, the MDCG, the competent authorities, notified bodies, authorized EU representative economic operators, and PRRC. And we'll just go through each one of these and then talk about what their roles and responsibilities are. European Commission. So the EU Commission is an entity that interacts with the different stakeholders. They basically interact with the EU Parliament. They interact with the national competent authorities. They interact with the Medical Device Coordination Group. And just as an example, when EU MDR was postponed, it was MDCG that recommended it. Then the Commission basically went ahead and proposed it, and the Parliament, the EU Parliament, approved it, and then it became the law. And then we went a year later into, so that's the interaction, the type of interaction that happens between these entities. And also the Commission interacts with the scientific community, and also they hold consultations with for major policy issues with the public. Notified bodies. So notified bodies, their function is basically to perform conformity assessment for all medical devices in EU, except for medical devices that are self-certified, which are basically class 1s that are non-measuring, non-sterile, and non-single-use surgical devices. They share their experience and exchange views on application of conformity assessment across, and then they provide also feedback to Commission, and as they move along, they address the ethical aspects of the notified body activities, and they consistently look at the standardization at the national levels to make sure that the EU member states are looking at this consistently across all the states, as opposed to where we were with the MDD, where the national competent authorities could take a little bit different action compared to the other nations. In general, under the MDR, they operate under stricter guidelines compared to what we had before. So there are people that used to have no, for example, findings before. Now they might find themselves that there's more scrutiny, and then there's more findings compared to the past. Competent authorities. Competent authorities are basically the national regulatory bodies for each country. So there's 28 of them in each one of the member states, are responsible for making sure that the products are safe and effective. And it's the competent authorities that are providing, each one of the countries are providing a member for the Commission. So the Commission has 28 members that basically does what the Commission does, but the makeup of those come from the competent authorities. The Medical Device Coordination Group. The Medical Device Coordination Group is an entity that is put in place by the Commission. MDCG is an expert group that provides advice on the Commission and assists the Commission and the Parliament to ensure a harmonized implementation of medical device regulation. As you could imagine, there's a lot of different interpretation on how the MDR is written, and MDCG's job is to issue a lot of guidance on how they interpret it, and they do this not only for the manufacturers but also for notified bodies. There's close to 100 guidance documents that are either written or endorsed by the MDCG group. A person responsible for regulatory compliance. This is definitely a new addition to the regulations. That now there is a requirement that each manufacturer has a person responsible for regulatory compliance, and their job is to ensure conformity is checked throughout the life cycle of the product. And they're responsible for ensuring that the technical documentation is up to date. The manufacturer is following the post-market surveillance activities, and all of those are being performed as expected. Also, PRRC is not just for the manufacturer, but also the authorized representative must have a permanent PRRC. For the manufacturers, PRRC obviously could be one or more people, and if the company is small, they could definitely hire or outsource the PRRC, but the function is required regardless of the size of the company. Authorized representatives. So for any company that is not in the EU and is not located in the EU, there is a requirement which is similar to what we had before under MDD, that you need to have an authorized representative so that they can basically register you with the competent authority in the country that your authorized representative is. There have been some changes in authorized representatives in a sense that now they're one of the economic operators and there's more liability. In case if the manufacturer is not able to meet their obligation, then it's the next, it escalates up to the authorized representative to have obligations that they have to meet for the product that they registered with the competent authority. And as we talked before, obviously they need to have a permanent PRRC. Okay, economic operators. I mean, we talked about some of the limited amount of responsibilities and liabilities before, but now it's all of the economic operators they have responsibilities, and MDR defines those of what each one of the economic operators have to do, and these are the manufacturers, the authorized representative, the importers, and the distributors, and each one of them has a responsibility that they didn't used to have. For example, if you look at the authorized representative, we talked about them, but they have to make sure that the technical documentation is up to date. They have to be aware of what's going on with the corrective actions, the UDI labeling, etc. The importers, now they have to first of all register in the UDAMAD, and they're responsible for all the activities for handling, storage, and distribution, and any sorts of corrective actions or any type of field activities that occur, including the UDI labeling and post-market surveillance. They are also have to be on top of those. And it's the same thing with the importer. So now the responsibilities have been extended to the other entities that they first have to register, and then they have certain activities that they take, which is different than what we had under MDD. Unique device identifier. So one of the elements that was added to the MDR is this unique device identifier, which was implemented by FDA in the past. but now EU with MDR is introducing the UDI. And UDI has these three parts: the device identifier, the product identification, and the carrier. And the device identification basically is all about the version and model of the number and its manufacturer. And the whole purpose of the UDI is to be able to track and know what's going on with the product in case of recall, in case of any sort of safety notices, etc. And the UDI PI is a conditional production identifier. There is information about serial numbers, expedite, lot numbers, date of manufacturing, etc. that goes into that portion of it, and then the actual the label that has either the human readable form or the automatic identification and data capture, which is either a barcode or a RFID type of being able to automatically read it. So here's how the UDI looks like, and you have the different aspects of the UDI, and as we talked before, either you could have a matrix barcode or a linear barcode or RFID, or in the future some other ways of identifying this. And the whole purpose is that you would be putting in information not only at the time that you manufacture the product, but throughout the life of the product. You would be updating and submitting information about anything so that the end users can know what the state of the product is in case they need to recall it, in case anything else that needs to happen. It's just much easier to address it. And all of this information goes into the UDAMET, and UDAMET would take care of it. So here are the timelines for UDI implementation. Right now, we do have the ability to obviously, in terms of the putting together the UDI, there is the HIBICs and the GS1s, etc., which are similar or the same as what you do in the US. Actual implementation, so there is the registration part of it, and then there is the actual placement of the carrier on the label itself. And here are the timelines for those for implantables like class 3s last year, and for class 2As and Bs, it's going to be in 2023. And for all class 1s, it's going to be until 2025. And then if you look at the implantables for direct marking, that's going to be basically a couple of years later in 23 and 25. So UDAMET is a huge, huge change compared to what we had under MDD. Basically, if you think of UDAMET, it's just a bunch of databases that FDA has in place and then some. So there are basically 6 modules in UDAMET. One is the actor registration, and which is basically all the economic operators, which has been in place. Although it's people that need to go in and register as economic operators, and it's a little bit different than what they used to have before. Then we have the UDI device registration model that we talked about a little bit. Certificates and notified body modules. So in the past, we didn't have any way. In the FDA, we have the access database, for example, to go and look at the product registration or manufacturer listings. But in EU, we didn't have that. And then this brings that aspect of it in. It's been implemented. The notified bodies are uploading some of these, but it's not mandatory yet until the whole EU UDAMET is going to be in place. So the other modules that are in progress are the clinical investigation and performance of studies that would be uploaded, the vigilance and post-market information, and the market surveillance module, which is scheduled for later this year. UDAMET is planned to be fully operational by the mid next year, and then it will be mandatory to do all of these different activities that go into UDAMET. So this is, as I said before, it's a huge effort. There are 3 ways to interact with it. One is you can go through a portal in a manual way, and you use the portal user interface and a browser to enter your data. Obviously, as you have more products, this becomes a lot more error prone, and it's hard to be able to do that through this mechanism. Then there is something in the middle, semi-automated, where you could basically have a file that has the information. You could upload that using XML formats, and there are mechanisms to validate it. And this would basically eliminate any sort of data entry error, but this requires you to have some sort of a tool to convert your information to a valid XML file. You could definitely do 2, but the best way for if you have a lot of these products and you have a lot of things that you need to submit, the best way to do it is fully automated, which is a machine-to-machine. And in this particular case, it's an interactive process where you're submitting, you're making sure that everything is good, and it's a lot easier from that perspective, but it does take a lot more effort to implement it, and this could also be outsourced. Technical documentation. This is some that really changed a lot in terms of what from moving from MDD to MDR, especially as we move along down the line. And here, I think when we move to the middle, for example, general safety and performance requirements, there is, we used to have the essential requirements checklist, but now it's a lot more comprehensive, and it's all about the safety and performance of the device. Then, if we move further down, it's all the other things that we have to do, in particular, the post-market surveillance, which is a huge difference compared to what we had under MDD, in a sense that now, although we did have PMS before, but now the notified bodies are scrutinizing that a lot more, and you really have to look at it from the life cycle perspective of what you have to do for MDR, in a sense that it ties back to how you're monitoring the information, how you're basically keeping track of how the product is being used, what the clinical performance is out there. So you have to have all of those. So the PMS, it's not only gathering information, but analyzing it, taking actions, and ensuring that the product throughout its life cycle, it's safe and effective. Conformity assessment. So this is if you are have notified body involvement, something that the notified body would do. So this is something that obviously is taking a lot longer compared to before, and there's a lot more scrutiny by notified body in this area. And when they come in, they're looking at both your quality system and your technical documentation. There are all sorts of activities that happens during the conformity assessment, since there aren't enough notified bodies. And not only there are new products that are coming in, but all of the existing products that the manufacturers have extended their MDD certificates, all of those are also coming in. So there's definitely a huge backlog. So the conformity assessment itself, assuming that you have already scheduled it and notified body, you're on their schedule, it's not that bad. However, overall, when you look at the bigger picture from the time that you submit your technical documentation to the time that they go through a process of first looking at it from a completeness perspective, a preliminary completeness check, and hopefully you have done your work and your technical documentation is complete, so there's less interactions, and that's where this comes in. However, in reality, just because of the backlog, just because of how much is going on, this is typically a 6 to 9+ months activity from the time that you work on your technical documentation to the time that you get your MDR. So if you have products that are under MDD and expire in the next 12 months or so, yeah, definitely you need to get started with getting things ready and then working with your notified body to make sure that this is all in place. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Marie to talk about the MDR and the contract sterilizer. Marie?
Thank you, Syed. Thank you, everybody, for being here and for your interest on the topic. Syed, I think you provide us a good overview of general description on the MDR. What I would like to do during the second part of this webinar is to provide you the perspective of a contract sterilizer, and also to give you some practical example. And I will finish the presentation here with the main information that should be part of a regulatory submission, but really specifically to the sterilization process. So I remember back in 2018, I was just coming back from maternity leave, and I started the role that I'm having right now, so regulatory quality directors for the region. And my first challenge was to understand how this MDR topic is going to impact us, and also to identify how we are going to be able to support you into that journey, to support you as our customers. So we started by creating a gap assessment internally. So we had small groups with the key people, and we decided to assess both the quality management system part and also the technical performance part. So to have a view on the quality management system and also on how we are doing validation. We knew that MDR was impacted really heavily our customers, and we didn't expect any major gaps regarding our quality management system. And the reason for that is because we are a supplier and we are not considered as an economical operators like Syed mentioned before. So we don't have to deal with all the EDAMED and things like that. And the main other reason why we were not really heavily impacted from a quality management perspective, it's because we are already compliant with ISO 13485. So we did the gap assessment, and the main things that we had to do, we had to update our customers' quality agreement and some procedure, because we had to allow unannounced audits from notified bodies, so from your notified body or customers one. We have, as supplier, as contract sterilizer, we have as well notified body. Our notified body are coming annually to audit us in each facilities, and they are coming to assess our quality management system, but also to give us the accreditation regarding sterilization standards. Those audits are really not customers or product specific. It's really to assess our performance. So practically speaking, so far we haven't got any unannounced audit from your notified body. But what we have been asked is to provide some documentation for some submission from notified body. So we really have to ensure that we're gonna have a non-disclosure agreement between your notified body and ourselves, because we don't have any direct contract with them. So it's really important to keep that in mind in case of unannounced audits or documentation requests. Okay, so after having assessed the quality management system part, now we are going to talk about how MDR may impact or not the way of how we were doing our validation processes. Basically, standards are still the same. So the way of where we were doing our validation in the past, it's still compliant. So we didn't have to change on how we were doing things. But the main difference compared than before, it's the scrutiny on how documented evidence are needed. So we need to have evidence, written evidence for everything. It's really the main difference. And here, all our customers have performed or are performing the gap assessment to identify what kind of information are missing. One of the main impact for us was really an augmentation of the number of some validation. We have to pay attention here because we don't want to be a bottleneck for you. You have all the same timeline, and it's really important to have the right planification in place to not us being a bottleneck. So now I'm gonna take you through some practical example that we had, and it's mainly related to the ethylene oxide process, but it's because it's what we have seen so far, some additional requests towards EO and less compare gamma. So the first one is related to ethylene oxide residue. So we know that with MDR, we have really a higher focus on safety. We have a standard to define the level of residue required after a NEO process. We had some data to support, for example, here stand. We had some data to support the EO residue level for an adult, but not always for babies. And we had to prove that the stand that could be used for both could achieve the right level residue limits for both. So we had to perform additional studies to ensure that we have the right limits. Another type of studies that we had to perform is related to PCD. So what is it, a PCD? It's a process challenge device that we are using during our EO processes. That PCD must be equal or higher resistant to your product. And what we have seen, it's a lack of documented evidence for some customers. So we had to perform those additional relative resistance studies to have that evidence. So here you can see the pictures of some PCDs example, a syringe with a BIs inside, for example. Another one, important one, kit manufacturer. So we have kit manufacturer customers. A kit maker, a kit manufacturer can have a kit with individual product from individual manufacturers. So for example, you can see that you have a syringe that can be incorporated into a kit, and that kit is going to be processed all together with one sterilization cycle. And what we have seen is that initial manufacturer of the syringe here, for example, got product functionality testing evidence with their own sterilization cycle. But once that product has been included into the kit manufacturer designed its own cycle, and then we didn't have product functionality testing with that cycle. So two solutions here, remove the syringe from the kit, or to perform additional functionality product testing with the kit manufacturer cycle. Annual process review. So Syed, you mentioned that we have an increased scrutiny and request for post-market surveillance studies. So even once your product is on the market, you have to continuously provide data to ensure that your products are still compliant. What we have seen during the last 2 years, it's an additional request of us performing process paper review. And what is it, a process paper review? It's a review of all most critical parameters of your cycle. And we are assessing if we are still under control and compliant. And the reason why we have been asked to provide more of those kind of study, it's because it's really a great support for your post-market input surveillance as part of the MDR. Let's talk about double sterilization. So here, it's gonna be applicable for the EO technology, but the principle, it's exactly the same for gamma. So when you have to augmentate a dose, or when you have to do a double sterilization, you need to have evidence that you have product and packaging functionality to cover 2 sterilization or a dose augmentation in this case. And we had an example, we had a power outage in one of our facility, and even if we are trying to do our best to avoid any non-conforming products, that kind of things can happen. And in that case, for that customers, we have been lucky because they had validated the double sterilization. So we had been able to release the product without any problem. Okay, donc that was for some practical examples that I wanted to share with you. I'm gonna quickly, because I can see that the time is moving fast, quickly talk about what should be part of a regulatory submission, but more specifically to the sterilization process. We are a critical supplier, so we have to be part of your submission. We need to find our name, our address, what kind of service we do for you. Any kind of additional certificate must be part of this submission as well. Something important, you need justification if you want to add or remove a critical subcontractor. So you need motivation to do change like that. In terms of regulatory submission, you have to be prepared that your submission is going to be reviewed by microbiological experts from the notified body side. And here I wanted to have one word regarding product adoption. So when you have to do a resubmission for a product adoption, and what is it, a product adoption? It's when you have validated a product family with the EO cycle, with a validated EO cycle, for example. And it's when you want to add a new product, you need to have documented evidence that your product is not going to be more resistant than the main product, the worst case product of your product family. So that's a product adoption, and you need to have rationale to support that into your submission. Regarding process equivalency, it's really recommended to validate another equipment for business continuity reason. So it's really important to define how you are going to validate another equipment as part of your submission. Quick deep dive on irradiation submission part. So really important to explain how you have validated the minimum dose, and that it's for a lethality perspective. And then you have also to explain and define how the maximum dose has been validated. Maximum dose, it's more for products and packaging functionality here. And once you have that range, in routine, what you want to do, you want to be within that dose range. And to support that, it's important to add it as part of your submission, the dose mapping from the equipment, but from our facilities. EO processed, so having an explanation and rationale on how your bioburden has been determined, how you control your bioburden, and how everything has been validated, first things. Product sterility, you need also to define and explain how product sterility report and also how you have validated that part. Comparative resistance study, so it's a PCD that I have mentioned before, how you have selected your PCD for your validation, and then for sure the entire validation fractional half cycle and data. without forgetting the residue part, like the example that I explained a few minutes ago, where you have to define the right EO limits in this case. I'm gonna, just one word here, customer's responsibility. I just wanted to highlight the responsibility here. Customers for sure remain responsible for the safety, the quality, and also the sterility of the product. So that's customer's responsibility. But as contract supplier, we have to comply with ISO guidance as well. So we have to be comfortable with the customer approach in order to process your product. We cannot accept to not following a guidance because it would put us under a critical position. New technologies and new products, just in case, so regulator and notified body are really familiar with EO, with irradiation. In general, we have standards to do that. It may be less the case when you would like to sterilize your product with a new technology. It's really important to have a partnership with your contract sterilizer in order to submit a kind of scientific advice. That's something that is possible with a pharma authority, where you can seek advice. And having that partnership between your contract sterilizer and the customer here, it's gonna be really adding value and simplify the process. I think that's gonna be the last slide here, and it's really the takeaway that I wanted you to remember here. Sterilization standards have not changed. So the way of where we were doing things are still conform, but how we are document things are more important than before. We are part of this journey as a stakeholders, and we really doesn't want to be your bottleneck to reach your submission timeline. So I'm sure that there is an anticipation and a planification and discussion with us in order to be ready and to have a smooth journey until the goal. Thank you, everybody.
All right.
Open for question now, I think.
Syed, any things to add?
Yeah, just a quick summary of my talk. As you could imagine, with bringing in MDR, there are some risks and benefit. Obviously, in the long run, it's going to be much better for a protection of the public health with the MDR being introduced. But there's also some negatives in the sense that the new regulations obviously would result in increased costs, would be obviously commercialization delays just because of the scrutinies, etc. There are potentially some manufacturers may decide that the burden is too much and possibly remove some products from the market, and that would result in, just because of the timelines, less innovation. But on the positive side, there is going to be a heightened device safety attention that all the stakeholders will be paying. There's a lot more transparency, and there's going to be consistency across all the 28 member states. There will be stronger oversight, and it overall, I think it's going to result in a much better products in the longer run. But we just have to keep in mind that there's also some negative aspects of it. Back to you, Stephanie.
Thank you so much, Syed and Marie, for your insights and information into today's topic. That was amazing. We are going to open up Q&A, so if you haven't had a chance to ask a question, please click that Q&A bubble at the top of the screen, and we are going to get into that in a minute. Before we begin that session, I did just drop a link in the chat section of this presentation. You can take a moment to complete this quick survey. We, as always, value your feedback, and this will help us shape our future offerings. So today's presentation will be made available in our new Sotera Health Academy. If you are interested in this topic or others like it, you can log on today at soherathealth.com/academy. The Academy is a one-stop destination for our curated content available from our industry-leading experts from Nelson Labs, Sterigenics, Nordion, and RCA. From introduction to sterilization, lab testing, advanced topics, and in-depth learning, the Sotera Health Academy contains the educational content and resources you need to help mitigate risk and go to market faster and achieve excellence in your field. So if you have any questions or to learn more about our three businesses, Sterigenics, Nordion, Nelson Labs, you can reach out to us and our commitment to safeguarding global health at the contact information provided below. So with that, we have our Q&A section, and I'm going to introduce and welcome our Erin Dement. Erin is our Vice President of Sterilization Technologies for Sterigenics, and Erin is going to lead us in today's Q&A section.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for listening to the webinar we just went through. I'd like to invite anybody that has any questions, as Stephanie said, please drop it into the Q&A section on the top bar for the Teams application. First question, I think, Syed, there was a question about whether or not importers required PRRC. Can you take that one?
Absolutely. That's an excellent question. If we look at Article 15 of the MDR, they specifically list only the manufacturer and authorized representative. I could see from the perspective that now the importers have more responsibility, especially on the PMS activities and et cetera, the UDI, that how that is being interpreted that way. But I'm not aware of a requirement in the MDR that would require an importer to have a PRRC. According to Article 15.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Syed. Next question I have is, an authorized representative seems to have a higher liability in this overall process. Do you see or expect a number of authorized representatives to decline due to that?
That is an excellent question, and that's what I would expect to see, or the cost of providing that service is going to increase due to the liability. There is a lot more work that they have to do now. Before, for example, they took a couple of weeks to just take a quick look at your conformity assessment, your technical documentation, etc. But now they have a lot more responsibility, including the liability. That is a concern, that because it costs them a lot more, they have to hire a PRRC, they have to do a lot more activities, and then on top of it, the liability could potentially result in less number of them, or the cost has to increase.
Yeah, I think that actually sort of mirrors what we already have in the EU on the pharma side, right, Marie, with a qualified person. I know you know personally about that. Marie, maybe you can talk a moment about the difference between reprocessing of a single-use device versus reprocessing and sterilization. That's one thing that did come up in the MDR. There was sort of clarity on both, but you could be confused by that.
Yeah, we had a lot of discussion regarding that at the beginning, I remember. But indeed, it's allowed to reprocess products. It's not allowed based on MDR to reprocess single-use device. So, for example, a product that has been used in a hospital, it's not allowed by MDR to reprocess them unless local countries accept it. Mm-hmm. But re-sterilization, which is not a reprocess, is allowed.
Yeah, just a little nuance there in terminology, for sure. Do changes to the submission process have the same time frame as that initial, or as the let's say previous submission process did, or are we seeing with the implementation of the MDR, it's taking a different time period to get approvals?
That's an excellent question. And it all obviously, the changes, well, let's put it this way. If you already have an MDR certificate and it's a change to that, and depending on the scope of the change, because there is the whole concept of a significant change. And then if you have a change, it's going to be obviously much smaller scope compared to an initial approval for a technical documentation. However, we have to keep in mind, if you have an MDD certificate and then you make a change, you got to be careful with that change, because if the change is a significant change, then your MDD certificate could be invalidated, and now you have to make sure that you go to MDR, which is basically no different than having a brand new product. Yeah, exactly. So, and the concept of the significant change is a little bit open to interpretation, although there have been guidance documents by MDCG and others, but it's about the changing the intended purpose of it. It's about, does it impact the design and performance? It's about the raw material going in. It's about the sterilization or packaging potential changes that happen. If you change your packaging and that impacts how it's being sterilized, guess what? That is considered a significant change. And if it is a significant change, and then you do have an MDD certificate, then a notified body might invalidate that, and you go through the same process. But if the change isn't significant, then even if you have MDD, then that's a much, much easier way to go through. So I would categorize it as non-significant change the least, significant change more, initial or the first time approval is definitely a lot longer.
Okay, so quick 10 seconds for a wrap question, sort of a follow on. Is there an expedition process if you wanted a faster review?
Oh, that's an excellent question. But at the same time, I think we got to break down the what does it take to get to the approval process. There is the initial steps of preparing your system for conformity assessment, your quality system, your technical documentation. So when we break it down that way, assuming that you already have a notified body, then it's all about scheduling, preparing your technical documentation for a preliminary review and completeness checks. There are definitely guidance documents that the notified bodies have published. For example, BSI has a very comprehensive document that they explain what goes into. There are elements of it that are dependent on the manufacturer, that the manufacturer can control, and there are elements that are outside of their control. The things that are inside the control of the manufacturer are how good you put your, you tell your story in your submission package or your technical documentation, that you don't have to go back and forth. So that's under the manufacturer's control. But the other aspects, unfortunately, with all of the backlog of the notified bodies, scheduling and putting things so that they notified bodies would get to where you need to go, that takes a long time, and that's not under manufacturer's control. So that aspect of it, you can't do anything. But if you have technical documentation, for example, you have suppliers, subcontractors to do your sterilization. Now, the sterilization subcontractor could possibly increase, speed up what you need to do, or you have outside testing, whether it's 60601, whether it's usability. Those are the things that you could work with those. So there are basically three pieces to this puzzle. What notified body can do for you, there's not much you can do there, but you might be able to expedite what you do to ensure you get it through the first pass, and then what your subcontractors can do. There's not much you can do with the notified bodies. We went from 75 to now we are almost 30. And then there's a lot more people coming in because of the expirations of the MDR, because of the new products, etc. So there's a huge backlog.
All right, great. Thank you very much. I think we're out of time. Stephanie, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Aaron and Marie and Syed, for all of those great questions and for the presentation and your professional insights today. I'd like to take the time for our audience and say thank you for attending this session. Within the next 72 hours, you are going to receive a personalized follow-up email that will contain the details and a link to today's presentation on demand. Please feel free to share that link with your colleagues and peers who could not join us today. Again, my name is Stephanie Wadilla. On behalf of our speakers and the experts at Sotera Health, I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's session. Thank you and take care.